And the Eskenazi Museum is such a fabulous place with a long history, as I well know from my many years at IU. And so your job as the only full-time professional photographer there, is very, as I understand it, very diverse and must be just fascinating because the museum itself has such fabulous holdings. And not only that, but Shanti is also an independent professional photographer, and she focuses on weddings, portraits, and branding. And so this is a dual career. Shanti also earned her Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from IU with a second concentration in fine arts. So anyway, thank you, Shanti, for being here.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here, and I appreciate you all being here with me. I'll echo that, that it is, my job at the museum is really a multidisciplinary position. And I've pulled together some images to kind of share with you as I just kind of a smattering of the kind of work that I do there, as I kind of go through that to show some examples, and talk about some of the challenges I encounter and the problems I have to solve photographically. I think that to start, I always, especially with this job, I think because of its multidisciplinary nature, my career up until this job, I feel like I know was very significant. It was certainly a job where I came in and I had to learn on the ground in a certain sense, but I know that I wouldn't have been able to learn what I learned if I didn't have the baseline, which was I grew up in this business. My dad is a full-time professional photographer in Posey County, near Evansville. So he owns his own studio there. And so I effectively grew up in a photo studio. I started, my dad gave me my first 35 millimeter film camera when I was 12 or 13. My earliest experiences were in the darkroom. I was processing and printing when I was in middle school by myself in my dad's darkroom. So I say to a lot of photographers, in young photographers, since I'm at the university, I have conversations with young photographers. And I just think being able to shoot on film is such a boon to being a photographer who can solve problems. Because you have, in the realm of digital, it's easy to get lazy and just check your exposure on your live view or on your display and adjust from there and just play with it. But, being able to challenge yourself to shoot, to guess your exposure, to look at a scene and go, okay, well, I'm guessing my ISO should probably be around 1600. If I want to shoot wide open, then, that's going to give me the optimum shutter speed. I can probably pull this off at a 1/25 of a second. Like being able to kind of play with that, it just makes you a smarter photographer. I think that it's easy also for people to imagine that being a photographer is a primarily visual job, but as all of you know, there is the technical aspect that's a very real part of doing the job well. And, like we say, bringing home the gold. And, on that note, to almost contradict myself, on the other side of bringing home the gold is what I found is knowing how to trust your camera, knowing, like, for example, when I'm shooting events if I'm shooting most things that I'm shooting ambient light, I'm going to shoot on AV, and I'm typically going to shoot around 2.8, depending on the lens and the situation. And I shoot on auto ISO. And I always think it's knowing how to shoot manual, but it's knowing when shooting manually isn't actually the best choice, because it's inefficient in certain situations. So that's something that I think has, started in the dark room, started with shooting film, was knowing how to use the camera in a scientific way and understanding what the camera is doing. And it's something that then translates to digital. So I started working with my dad. He gave me my first camera. I started, processing and printing and all of that. And really, when I was 12, I really thought it was long past the time when I should have started working for him. Like, he finally let me start working for him when I was 12. And I was like, oh my God, finally. And of course, now in retrospect, I'm like, he was taking a 12-year-old to jobs. It's kind of ridiculous. But at the time I felt pretty eager to get started. And then I went to IU, started kind of, I came to it, I think I kind of meandered into making this my job. I didn't think that I didn't necessarily think it was going to be my job. I don't think I knew either way, but I just kept being curious. And post-college, my degree's in journalism and fine arts. And, within the realm of journalism, I really enjoyed the study of journalism from both a writing and photography perspective. But I never identified as a headline chaser. Within the School of Journalism and within the work I did in journalism, there's a certain energy of like the people who want to like be the first on the scene and tell the story and break the news and all of that. And that wasn't me. I didn't feel compelled to tell stories or race to a scene to break a headline. And so I knew that wasn't exactly it. I did work in magazines for a while, started out at Glamour, and actually at Glamour, the internship that I was asked to do was in video production, which was so interesting because that was like my first experience in production. I really had no idea what I was signing up for. I went into journalism knowing I wanted to work at Glamour because I know it's a fantastic magazine. It's a really wonderful women's magazine with intelligent content. And I just always thought it was wonderful. And I thought, that's where I want to work. And so Glamour said, well, we don't have an editorial internship for you, but we do have a video production internship. And I'm like, whatever, it's at Glamour, I'll take it. And it was really great because I learned on the fly that production had nothing to do with the technical aspects of what I was doing. It was the logistics of pulling together footage and, being like, okay, well, we need this footage. So I'm going to go call the David Letterman offices to grab this old archive tape that we need, whatever. I learned a different side of the world in that way. So that was one really formative experience. I also started working with a very high-end wedding photographer in New York City in my early 20s. And that was a very informative experience as far as exposing me to a different level of clientele where the demands are much higher. And so I was in New York City for a while. I fell in love with a guy. I moved to Chicago. And so in Chicago, I got a job working as a real estate photographer for an apartment rental firm. So that was like yet another kind of like pivot. What I'm telling all this for is I kept having these pivots where I was doing something and then I'd switch and I'd go editorial. Now I'm doing weddings. Now I'm doing real estate. Now I'm doing magazine. It was like, it kept switching around. And I also found myself moving in more and more just by nature of finding myself in different worlds and encountering different people who offered me different options. I found myself working in commercial photo styling in Chicago. So working on set and working with photographers and art directors, but actually not being the person who's lighting or shooting, but being the person who's styling the still life or even the models on set. And I also did more work in production, again, learning about the logistics of putting together shoots and that sort of thing. So that all kind of got me up to this point where I had a highly multidisciplinary background, which I didn't really design. It just happened that way. And when the museum position opened, I had some friends. I really actually wasn't actively looking for a job. I was just running my business, and somebody sent the posting to me and said, you should do this. You would be perfect for it. And I think the main thought was just because I really like art and I really like museums. And when I have a free day, I'm going to a museum. And they thought, well, what if you just went there every day? And so I got the job, and it's been amazing. I mean, there's, to kind of outline, I mean, the main objective of my position is to catalog our collection, which is more than 50, or I shouldn't say more, I should say somewhere in the realm of about 50,000 objects. And about maybe 30% of those are photographed. So there's a lot to do in terms of photographing art. I have a studio at the museum where I coordinate with registration and installation. I pull art in to be photographed. So that's like the main objective, is photographing the art in the studio. But in addition to that, there's like the branding and social media and marketing, kind of behind the scenes photography, and like general documentation of things that happen at the museum. There's portraits, and I do portraits of like most of the people who work at the museum in some capacity for our website. And generally, I mean, we like to have good portraits of everybody on hand, because people might, they might be involved in something that a press release needs a portrait, or a publication needs a portrait. Generally, just for anybody who's in any level of like any position, any full-time position at the museum, it's good to have a portrait on hand. So I do portraits for everybody I work with. And that was something that I changed up a lot when I took on the role. I actually took over the position for somebody who had he was retiring, and he'd been in the position for 34 years. And so I had an opportunity. I mean, my boss said, mix it up. We'll welcome some new energy, some new vision in this. And so I appreciated that. And I changed the style of portraits. I started doing all natural light portraits, which I'll show you here in a minute. And I did that. What I found, as much as I love a studio portrait, and I think a studio portrait is fabulous, and it has its place more and more in the world we live in. One of the principles that people talk about a lot in the realm of selling anything really is people buy from people. People connect to people. And I found that people connect more with an ambient light or a natural light portrait. And so I like to find beautiful light, but I do natural light because I think it adds a level of warmth to the portraits. So real quick, I can show you just a couple of portraits just to kind of start moving through some of the stuff that I intend to share with you. I do portraits. So I'm going to start with somebody. How do I make this full again, guys? I'm figuring this out. Oh, I have to import these. Okay, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I thought I'd done this. There we go. I'm doing it, guys. It's going fast. But I thought I'd start with a face because you've all met Nan before, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Sweet. Because Nan sent me your way in the first place. So I thought I'd start just by showing you Nan's portrait. And what I do for everybody is I like to help them narrow it down to a winner, do the processing on it. And kind of like a side note on processing, I always, I think about photoshopping, especially on people photography. It's a controversial thing, right? Like photoshopping can be, some people feel like it takes away from the authenticity or somehow, and I'm pro Photoshop. And for me, the way I think about it is when you look at a raw image or even a processed image that is not retouched, you're still looking at effectively just absorbed light or light that has been captured. There's no emphasis, there's no soul. And like when we look at each other, we see each other's eyes, we see each other's beauty, we see each other's heart, and we don't see blemishes or bags under people's eyes or these little things that show up in pictures that we never notice in real life. And so for me, I like to remove the distractions because I think it shows a more accurate picture of how we see people. So that is why I'm pro Photoshop. So what I like to do is I like to give them kind of I'm going to say an uncropped version in color and black and white. And then I do a crop version in color and black and white. And then I like to just give people these options, and then they kind of can cover a few different uses during whatever should come up during that. And just to give you another, I started doing the portraits outside the museum. I'm trying to find, oh, there they are. After COVID, and I'm very happy with how they've been. But I mean, this is actually even in the lobby of the museum. So I get great results outside or inside just because of all the gorgeous light we have. And that's actually that I almost never on these, sometimes if it's a really wacky day, light wise, I'll bring in a reflector or something, but almost never do I do anything other than just use the light and see the light and watch it. This is also, I do portraits of our donors at the museum. And that is also really rewarding work because, you know, these people truly provide for us in terms of our ability to keep doing our jobs, to have our collection, for our collection to be safe, for us to put on the shows we do, for in some cases for our salaries. You know, there are salaries at the museum that are donor funded. And so being able to do these portraits for them, it feels really good because it's a way that I can offer something back to them. And you know, and the fact is the people who give to the museum, this is, by the way, Kurt and Judy Simic, and the people who give to the museum are people who care about our mission, who care about art, and who care about the community and about arts education. And so being able to do these environmental portraits for them in our galleries is also really cool. And of note, this is also another natural light portrait. This is literally just window light. So that's just kind of like a brief foray into the portrait work that I do. I also thought I'd show you a little bit of the kind of like behind the scenes and marketing type work I do. Doing that screen share again. So this is within our conservation studio. And, you know, one of the really cool things about this position is that I really have the ability to just be part of all sorts of things that happen at the museum. We're hanging art here. This is actually before the reopening in 2019. So I started the position in 2019 in June, and the museum reopened in November of 2019. So for the first few months I was there and the museum was empty all the time. And then people started coming back, and then COVID happened and they all left again. And now they're back. So it's good. But this was during, you know, reinstallation, post-renovation, and being able to go into conservation lab, being able to go into galleries. This is, if you go into the museum and you see this art up here, that like the flying pieces of paper installation, that's by an artist named Paul Coxedge. And this is Paul Coxedge who came to install it. And this is Elliot Reichert, who is our curator of contemporary art. So that was like, you know, another cool thing that's not on topic. I'm gonna see what else I have in here. I also photograph our installations. Well, here's some more behind the scenes stuff before we do that. This is Janelle, our preparator for prints, drawings, and photographs. So she mats photographs and drawings and prints, and you know, puts the adhesive on them, and she's amazing at what she does. She frames that stuff. So I did this for some social media. And this is just, we're working, this is working with, well, there's Nan again. You see Nan again. We're working with a few different curators and registrars to examine these drawings that were in storage for a very long time. So just really cool behind the scenes type activity is always fun. And, just gives you an idea of, marketing is, people visiting the museum, and, interacting with it. This is all stuff that we use for like our website, our social media, and, our cafe obviously it's all part of just how we interact with the world. There's a preview for later. So, and then going back up here, I want to go back up here. I was going to talk about another thing is like every time a show opens, part of what I do is I do installation photography of that show. And it is for promotion. It's also for documentation so that our registrars and our curators and really anybody on our team can go back and look once again at how a show was displayed, certain details that they can just recall from a photograph that might not be anywhere else in documentation. So this is a show that was up last year by an artist, a contemporary artist out of Brooklyn called Leonardo Drew. And it was an amazing show. I wish it could have stayed up forever, to be perfectly honest, because I loved it so much. And we actually did acquire one of his pieces this year as well, which was very exciting. Again, with the installation photography, this is something, I think my work ranges from being, sometimes it's very like organic and I'm, shooting on AV and I'm out with people and I'm just, watching activity happen. Other times like with this, I'm on a tripod, I'm leveling, and it's much more, technical. I'm shooting at like F10 and, shutter's moving a lot slower for that reason and all of that, but it's all about just documentation. And all these different, it's interesting because it helps to revisualize the show if you can kind of like put it back in context, how things relate to each other within that gallery. This was another really cool activity I got to do last year with IU Studios. So I am not a drone pilot, but we needed some drone photography of the museum. And so I actually called IU Studios, and James Brocher, who is the lead photographer there, is a drone pilot. He brought his Hasselblad drone, and basically I directed this shoot without actually doing this shoot. So that was another really cool activity, just get to experience that and just play with it, I want to talk a little bit too about art photography and some of what I do. So, it ranges from 3D to 2D. Many realms in between there. I mean, I've got these are some stone pieces right now. And this is actually, while most of the work I do is in my studio at the museum, there are times when, because of installation demand or whatever is happening, I just need to shoot a piece on display in the gallery. And so I typically do that on Mondays because that's when our galleries aren't open. And I pretty much pull my whole studio into a gallery. So this was a pretty epic 3-day shoot. This was actually before reopening, where we had, brought the gallery into the studio, I brought the studio into the gallery and photographed these ancient works. And, it was rewarding. It was exciting. And being able to, it was one of my first big projects, and being able to coming out the other side of this and successfully lighting these and feeling good about these images was a really big deal for me. And the curators were on site for that. So they ask for, sometimes they'll say, oh, we want details of the back of his head because we need to study that, or that sort of thing. So sometimes there are specific demands for what needs to be shot in that realm. So this was just a really rewarding project and really helped me kind of dive in the deep end of this type of work of the art photography. This is another, we have a Saul Steinberg, a significant Saul Steinberg collection. He's the cartoonist. He did the famous cartoon. It was a New Yorker. He did a lot of New Yorker stuff, but the cover, that's like how a New Yorker sees the rest of the world. And it's like East River, Manhattan, Hudson, Jersey, flyover, LA. And it's, it's just, it's a cute cartoon. And we actually own that piece, which is pretty wild. And, but this was one kind of interesting Saul Steinberg piece. Some of it's just on paper and it's like very normal. Others is like this is on corrugated cardboard and it's actually 2 pieces. So that was, there, and I shot it both ways because there are often artworks that need to be seen in multiple different ways. They need imagery to show different things at different times. This is another one that I shot in the gallery. This is a piece by an African artist named Anatsui. And this was a fairly recent acquisition. This was a 2019 acquisition. And it's a really fascinating piece. If you ever come to the museum, it's on the 3rd floor, and I highly recommend coming to see it. But the reason I needed to shoot this one on like in the gallery is that the ridges that like you see in that, like these kind of ripples and things, are not static. They are that's the nature of how it's installed, but not necessarily the nature of the work, if that makes sense. If you laid it out, it would just lay flat. And we installed it in this way to display its flexibility. And so it actually was necessary to be installed for that reason, because that's part of the whole point of it. This, of course, was a very exciting project. Did anybody come to see the Glenn Close show last year?
Yeah.
Good. I got the opportunity to photograph some of these costumes for the catalog. And it was, surreal to say the very least. I grew up watching the Dalmatians movies and, and among everything else, right? It's Glenn Close. She's legendary. This was one of the dresses. There were a few that I was like, I would wear that. Like, I want that dress. This was one of them. I want this dress, but I'm not going to get it. But they were gorgeous and surreal, and it was so fun. And yet another really interesting situation in terms of logistics of lighting and setting this up. This was one where I actually pretty much brought an entire studio, including, I brought an entire studio, including background stands, everything else, to a basement in Kirkwood Hall, a basement classroom in Kirkwood Hall. So there have just definitely been some interesting situations of just creating studios where there aren't studios that seem to happen from time to time.
So you weren't able to photograph them while they were on display at the museum?
I did, yes, but these are for the catalog. So for like most things we do, so these I did a month, like a year in advance of the exhibition. So we do like all the stuff for the catalog, and then I do installation photography as well, but they live at the Sage collection. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. And then of course they requested some details, Fatal Attraction shoes. And that was the other thing that was so cool about these. It's like, being able to see how worn they are. They're real. She actually wore these, it really brought it home. And it was really exciting as well to see. They used a lot of these images on when you were going down 7th Street, and I forgot what on the lamppost, the signage on the lampposts. They used these images on the lamppost. So it was really exciting to be able to see my work on those signs as well, to promote the show. And this was from Dangerous Liaisons. And this is actually where it's the embroidery is completely worn down from where the skirt rubbed on the corset. And this this is just, yet another example of some of the kind of 3D work I do. This is a pretty small piece. I think it's a good thing, and it's sometimes not ideal thing that when you look at the photos, that the way I shoot these, you can't always tell scale. This is fairly small. This is only about, if I'm remembering correctly, about 8 inches tall. And I obviously, there's different lighting I do. If you'll watch this one, watch this torso area, I change the lighting just a little bit. And I do it a couple of ways. The reason I do it a couple of ways like that is sometimes the curator will want to use it for different purposes. Like if they're talking to an appraiser and they want to really show a part of the work, then it makes more sense to use a certain, but if it's just for styling or just for, just for cataloging, it might be a different, they might want the other image. So there are times when I do a few different types of lighting on a single piece. When possible, I like to get the bottoms and tops of pieces. And my general policy on art is if it's in the studio, I want to shoot every angle possible, because the fact is, who knows when it's coming back into the studio. And it's really difficult if somebody needs an angle of an object and you're just like, I can't help you because I already have a list of stuff that's coming in and I can only do so much. I can't, if this piece is in storage and I've got a list of other things that need to be shot, I can't help you, at least not, at least not immediately. And so I like to capture as much as I can when it's there to minimize situations like that in the future. Again, details. This is actually, you can see on this one, the artist is Elizabeth Catlett, and you can see this E and C, her initials, on the back of the piece. Back into this. And then I wanted to give you kind of another end of the spectrum. So that piece I just showed you is, I said about like 8 inches tall. This, on the other hand, is about 6 feet tall and reflective. So this, as it turns out, the top of this is all, I'm sorry, I'm flopping my, this is all burned. This is all burned, not badged, burned to be dark, because when I shot it, the way I needed to light it for everything else, this was all completely blown out. So these required some pretty serious post-production work. But it's a very large, very reflective piece of art. I've been doing a lot of African art recently, stuff like this. And then up here, you can see I've got the mask, which is, I think, fascinating and beautiful. And so much fun to light. I'm sure you've all found this, when there's something like this that you get to light and really make it look good, it's so satisfying, right? And that it was rewarding. Same with these baskets. This is a collection of, well, they call them baskets, of Japanese baskets that, and I mean, we call them baskets. They're more just like bamboo sculptures, the way they interact. And so we received a large gift of a lot of baskets, at least 20 or 30, I've forgotten the exact number of how many of these baskets we received. But these are fascinating, and the kind of thing that from every angle are a little different. There's yet another one of those down here, this basket here, that I just thought was gorgeous and so graceful. And so again, so satisfying and fun to get good images of. That's the top looking into the basket, the bottom. And then there's this vase, another piece that I just thought was gorgeous, and can't see scale in this. This is about 1.5 feet tall. It's a very hefty vase. I did not handle it myself. I I was not moving this thing onto set myself. I can handle art, like I am an art handler, but I don't handle heavy art. I let other people handle heavy art, just to minimize risk of me doing. I only handle the big, or like PDP and paintings and things like that, or like small objects. Again, with getting some details so you can really see the lift and how this is the relief of this. I mean, the detail is just really magnificent and lovely and everything else. And then of course, back to basics. Yeah, paintings, which are, I love this piece. It was on display last year. We had a focus gallery on surrealism, and just thoroughly love this piece. I think it's gorgeous. This one was a lot more straightforward to photograph, in that it's not reflective. There are some paintings that get varnish on them, that are varnished on purpose, but if there's the varnish on them, they can be really reflective, and that's really challenging. And there are certain things I'll do to minimize that. I can polarize my lens, I can polarize the lights, and sometimes even then they're reflective. And in those cases, there are other things I can do. I have a board where it's like a black board with a hole cut in it, and sometimes I shoot through that to block the way the light's hitting them directly, and just like wash the light. That's another way I can minimize reflection. And then sometimes I just take it into post and remove as much of the light flex as I can in post. So that's sometimes just something to navigate. It's not always clear what the best answer is. And I'm still learning, I still get pieces in that I go, okay, that's something new. So that's something new I have to learn. I wanted to show you the photographs from the Glen Close visit. I thought I had them in here. So this was really fun. So Glenn came this past fall and I got to see the show, and I got to walk through the gallery with her, and that was really special, just awesome. And it's funny to see someone who is in the gallery, who effectively owns the work and can do whatever they want with it. So nobody else would dare to touch a costume or whatever, but Glenn would just like come through, and she just like stroke the gowns and all of that. And it was so fun to me to just like see how free she felt with them, because she'd worn all these pieces, and taking pictures with her iPhone, and she was really happy with the show, and it was really cool to be able to be there. And I also got to photograph her, which was awesome as well. And it was just definitely an unforgettable experience and a really cool perk to my job that week. And we had a reception where we got to hang out that evening, and she came and interacted with our donors and stuff, and it was all just a really, really fun experience. And I'm checking here. Oh, this is one more thing I want to show you. This was a project. So you saw in this picture up here, these cartoons being laid out and brought out of storage, and you can see their size. So when I got these, I have a really tall camera stand in my studio, like, I don't know, maybe like 9 or 12 feet. And even with that height, I could only shoot them in thirds. And they actually, because they're graphite, they actually were a little bit reflective, and you can't quite tell just how reflective they are. Though you can, like right here, you can see some of that reflection. And they were challenging that way. I was able to knock down the reflection quite a bit, but just the demands of the piece, I could only do so much to solve that reflection. And so I shot them like in 3 parts. I also have already taken out all the weights, but there were weights all along the edges of these because, as you could see in that previous picture, they wanted to curl up. And so this was a pretty huge project last summer where I shot all of these. I think there were 12 of them, maybe more, and shot them all. And then these are the 3 parts, and then being able to stitch them together in post and create the final image. So that was something that was, definitely a learning experience for me, and something I was really proud of, was being able to deliver that final image of each of them as a stitched together piece. I'm checking my notes here to see if I've missed anything that I wanted to go over. I mean, I think the final kind of piece of my job that I haven't really talked about yet is that, in addition to, doing all this photography, I also manage, as you can imagine, a fairly large database of images. And I do a lot of cataloging. I've actually done a lot of recataloging and finding old images, and generally making the catalog as navigable as possible. And it's taken a lot of trial and error of seeing, you think something, you may be thinking with the art is pretty straightforward. I have the art, every individual piece of art in our museum has its own, what we call accession number. The accession number tells us exactly what it is. So the art, and it tells us what year we accessioned it by the number. So I have the art arranged by accession number and arranged by year, by decade. So it's very straightforward. Everything other than art, to some degree, is trial and error in terms of the best way to catalog it. There are times when I think maybe, oh, this should go in education, and then I realize I'm looking for it all the time in events, and I go, well, maybe it should just go in events then, because that's where I keep thinking it should be. So there are things I've learned through that. And it's certainly, we have a fairly structured file naming protocol. So that helps a lot as well. I think that file naming and cataloging is, at times, it's something that can't say all photographers, because I don't know all photographers, but a lot of the ones I know can resist stuff like that at times, because it's, a lot of photographers are just really creative people who their brain doesn't necessarily work that way. But I think that creating protocols for filing and for file naming, cataloging, and what's the other one? File naming, cataloging. Anyway, creating protocols for how you do that is so helpful when you're working with giant databases of imagery. And so we've got a really strict naming convention, and the way we write out the date and all of that, and it's helped me a lot. And I learned a lot from following that naming convention. I think I had fairly good habits with naming conventions and cataloging prior to this position, but it's really honed that in for me. And yeah, and so I think that's kind of an overview of what I do. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have, or if anybody, if you want to talk about cameras, I can talk about cameras. I'm here for you.
Shanti Knight, this is Dorothy Ann Strange. I'm curious, hi. Do you shoot, you said you shoot oftentimes in AV with f2.8 auto ISO. Is that for portraits and weddings and products? Or
that's a lot, I'll tell you. I really do. And I'll tell you the reason I do that for a lot. I mean, I use it for portraits. I use it at ambient portraits. Obviously, if I'm doing a studio portrait, I'm going to shoot manual. But generally, if I'm doing a natural light portrait, I'm going to do that. When I'm shooting weddings, again, if I'm not shooting strobe, if I'm not doing any artificial lighting, I'm doing that. if I'm doing branding sessions or something like that, or the marketing photos that I showed you, I use it for that. If I'm doing outdoor photography, and I think it makes a lot of sense for this reason. Generally, cameras are so smart now, right? They know the light, they can meter it. They go, here's your ISO. We know. And you go, yeah, you're right. And if you're shooting wide open, and I say wide open with like an asterisk, because if you're shooting like an f1.4, like you don't want to be shooting wide open all the time. That's playing with fire. 2.8 I find is generally a pretty safe aperture that, you know, if I'm shooting like a big group of people, I'm going to stop down to like f4, 5.6, something like that. But generally trying to keep your aperture as open as you can while getting what you need in focus. And you know, at that point that you're letting the maximum amount of light into your sensor that you can while getting what you want. So you know your shutter is basically going to go as fast as it can at that point. So it's just, I think I don't want to say foolproof because nothing is, but it's pretty darn close to foolproof. And in situations like that.
Good.
Does
I'll
that make sense?
try that out.
Yeah, I recommend
I
it. And,
shoot
you know,
manual, and you're right, it's very inefficient and slow.
it is. And I think, you know, another thing, again, when it comes to bringing home the gold, like I'll go back to a wedding example. Like if you're shooting a wedding and let's say you're in a church and then your, you know, ceremony's over, kiss, aisle, back out the door. Now you're outside and it's 2:00 in the afternoon and the sun's out and you've just been exposing for a cave of a church. And it's like, if you're shooting on auto ISO, your camera, you don't have to worry about your settings when you change location with that speed. And like, I think about like the reason I bring an assistant, I always bring an assistant to a wedding. And it's like, I want to be able to give my attention to the client. At that point, it's about the client experience. And I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to be trying to set up my light stands. I don't want to be carrying my bag. It's like, I need someone to do all of that so that I can be present with the client. And it's like, same thing with shooting AV. It gives you the freedom to be present with the job so that you're not fiddling with your settings.
Yeah, my husband yells at me when I do that.
Hey, Shanti.
Yeah.
This is Juliet.
Hey, Juliet.
I was intrigued by your photographs, especially of all the diverse art, which also has tremendously diverse colors. And so I was wondering how you ensure color accuracy, which of course would be quite crucial.
Yes, crucial. I use a color checker. I use a card and I just, you know, use the gray, use the custom white balance using the gray card.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, you know, like that beautiful vase that you mentioned as being heavy has that subtle color in it, the pale blue and then the shadows in the artwork. I thought that was a real challenge to photograph that as well as you did.
Thank you so much. You know, and it is interesting. I think that brings up an interesting point. In general, when I first started the job, Kevin, you might know him. Does anybody know Kevin Montag? You might. Anyway, he's great. If you ever meet him, say hi. But he was the photographer who retired and whose job I took, or who let me take his job, and who's still a friend, by the way. And he told me, you know, the job is to make art look as good as it is, but not make it look better. And I think it comes back.
Good point.
I think it comes back again to that whole thing of like, if you are like with that vase, let's pretend that vase like didn't photograph well and you couldn't really see the pattern. Even though it seems, I'm going to say it would sound disingenuous to bump the saturation up on it. Actually, because again, the camera doesn't have a soul, it might be right to bump the saturation up a little bit so that you could see if the pattern were even more subtle, if it photographed more subtle than it seemed in real life, you'd want to bump that saturation.
Interesting. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Thank you.
certainly.
Auntie, I have a question.
Sure.
When you're doing the large format, like the cartoons and the murals, and
Yeah.
having to stitch them back together,
Mhm.
do you ever have any trouble with like pincushion or barrel distortion trying to get all the edges to line up and be straight?
Well, full disclosure, I haven't done it a whole lot.
Okay.
So I don't have like a huge catalog of experience to speak to on that. Those were a particularly interesting challenge because their edges were uneven anyway. The biggest deal that I found with that is shooting overlap. Excuse me. So rather than like, it's not about lining up the edges, it's like overlapping the edges. If that does that make sense?
Yes.
So then that helps the computer brain do what it does. So then you don't have to do the thinking for the computer.
I had to do a big mural for somebody once. It was at least 20 feet across.
Oh my God.
And I had to use, and it was big. So I was using like a 20 something millimeter, 35 millimeter. And they stitched together okay, but the individual panels had a little bit of pincushion and barreling in them. That was very hard to fix.
That's really interesting. I have to talk to my cousin, Nick, because he actually does this as well as a freelancer in New York. And he just has this extensive experience in stitching. And I swear, if he ever wanted to do any kind of education about stitching, he'd have people lining up for it. Fortunately for him, and unfortunately for the rest of us, he's so busy that he can't do anything but shoot. But I have to talk to him and see if he's, if he has any thoughts on that. If I get any info from him, I'll get back with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was so thrilling to see that your photos with Glenn Close at that exhibit of the costumes that she actually wore. I'm sure that was very thrilling for you.
It was surreal. It really was. I mean, I think that it's always interesting to, meet a famous person, right? Because it's surreal. You go like, oh my God, like I kind of feel like I know you, but like I know I don't. This is like a sidebar, like kind of funny story, but like, or like kind of, I don't know. That's not embarrassing. I don't think it's embarrassing story. I just think it's funny the way we interact with famous people. I was at an event one time and I was kind of in a hurry and I saw this guy and I thought, oh, he looks familiar. And I like waved at him and I was like, hi. And then like, as I walked away, I was like, oh, that was Paul Schaefer. And like, and I think it's like similar with, with Glenn, where I go like, oh my God, hi. And she's like, hi, like we always feel like we know them. And so, yeah, just to be in the same room and like kind of experience and to get to witness her witnessing that show for the first time, it was, I mean, surreal is the only word, but it's not the only word. It's surreal is the best word. It's not the only word. Yes, it is what you said. It's thrilling. It's fun. It's rewarding. I mean, I didn't put that show together, but I mean, fortunately we have a magnificent team of museums. So in a certain way, I feel like I'm a part of it because my team is, and so getting to share that with her and, feeling like she was really happy with it was rewarding and it was totally thrilling.
It was so impressive to me seeing how much detail went into the costumes. I mean, I remember taking some close-up shots of the embroidery and some of the jewelry. I mean, you would think that for film, they would think, well, it's good enough, or we don't need that kind of detail because it doesn't show up in the film or whatever. But they did not skimp on anything with those costumes.
They really didn't. They really didn't. And I mean, all of them, but especially, you think Dangerous Liaisons and Cruella and like, those were just, they were next level. They were so detailed and so artfully crafted.
The tailoring was exquisite on many of the subtle pieces, just elegant.
Totally. Yeah. It was actually really cute too.
Yeah.
It was really cute too, because she was like looking at them and she's like, oh my God, I can't believe my waist was that small. And I'm
Yeah,
like, "Oh."
exactly. That was something that we noted too, like what a tiny waist she had.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and what also is really cool, I don't know if you all know this, but that endowment, I guess it's the right word, endowment, or the gift or the promise to the Sage Collection isn't just retrospective. It's actually an ongoing gift. So after she wrapped Hillbilly Elegy, she sent all of her Hillbilly Elegy costumes to the Sage Collection. So as she continues to do work, because she really doesn't seem to be slowing down. She actually fit us in. She was on set in Atlanta and like, you know, took a 48-hour break from filming in Atlanta to come see the show. Like, she's very much still working. And so she will continue to be sending costumes to the museum, which is, or I shouldn't say to the museum, to the Sage Collection, who owns them. So it's really exciting.
Okay, so I have a question.
Sure.
I was really impressed by your lighting and particularly the artwork stuff. And as an example, that vase, it seemed to be very well lit, but yet there was enough shadow that you could detect the texture and the raised portions of it and see the depth very well. You tell us a little bit about your lighting setup for those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, as you know, I grew up in my dad's photo studio, and which, like, the way his studio, he is a portrait artist. His studio is a portrait studio. Like, his fill light never moves. It's just, you know, and he does, and then he has a main that he moves around. And he can move the fill, he just doesn't, because it works where it is. And so I think about the way I mean, that was my first experience with lighting as a child. And I think the way I photograph sculpture, I really kind of approach them like they're little people. And so I have a main, and it's on a boom. It's a fairly large softbox on a boom, and that's my main. And then I have an edge light that I come in kind of behind at an angle to, in fact, let me share the screen, so because I think it'll help on this. Let's pull up this dude. Or we can go to the VODs. We might as well go to the VODs, right? Because that's what we're talking about. Let's do this one. So my main is hitting right here, basically. And then my edge light is hitting right here. And it's helping it pop off the background in that sense. And then I bring in a little fill here. And that's pretty much it.
So you're using 3 auxiliary lights?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then if I need to, you know, sometimes I'll encounter a piece, you know, every piece to some degree has different demands because they're different, right? So sometimes, like, if this area starts getting real dark and shadowy, I'll bring in another right here and just, or the other thing I will do a lot is, like, if this fill light starts to get too aggressive and it's just not working, I might actually put a whiteboard here along the side just to reflect the main back into it. So, or I might use a reflector right here. So, like, let's say I have I'm pointing at the screen and that's not helping. Let's say I have my fill right here, and then this side starts getting really shadowy, but another light is too much. Maybe I'll put a little reflector here. So it's a combination of lights and reflectors for certain objects.
Is there a lot of experimenting and trying different things?
Depends on the object, you know. Sometimes you get them on and you go, all right, that looks good. Let's get it in the computer. Let's move on. Right. But, you know, sometimes if they're problematic, it might take a minute. You know, this one was rough. This one was not only intimidating, it was just as scary as, well, it wasn't just as scary as I thought it was going to be. I procrastinated on this one for a while. I had it on set and I kept being like, oh, I have other stuff I can work on because that's scaring me. You know, it's reflective, and even you can tell not only is it reflective, but it's like got this unevenness in it. I just didn't know what to do with this. It was pretty scary. And this one, I'm trying to remember. I know I took a picture of my set when I had it, and if I had it on hand, I would, if I could remember, but I used a lot of light and some reflectors on this. Like there was a lot of experimenting on this one for sure. And a lot of like, what's that thing that I'm seeing in the reflection? Oh, I have to move this other shelf that I didn't even realize was over there until it was reflected in the object, kind of thing.
See, that would be a challenge and a half.
Yeah, it was terrifying. It was like,
Shanti,
that's like the scariest thing you encounter at work. It's pretty good.
Shanti, this is Tom Zoss. You mentioned
Tom.
film. Is
Yeah.
there actually a wet darkroom on campus anymore?
At the art school, not at the museum. Which I haven't been to the art school in quite a while, but I know it's there.
Just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, and I'm really happy for all the reasons I stated. I'm really happy there is still a wet darkroom on campus. I think that, I think it's a wonderful way to learn what you're doing. And as it turns out, my dad and I are talking about getting out some Hasselblads this wedding season, because I shoot with my dad a lot still as well, because he also owns his own studio and so we were talking a few weeks ago. We were like, let's get some medium format. Let's do some Hasselblads this season. So we're gonna get it back out. And we don't have a dark room anymore, but we'll just outsource the processing on it. I use, hey, Rauf. Is it Rauf? Is that how I say it?
Yes.
Okay.
Rauf. Yeah.
Rauf. Okay. I shoot. That's a great question. Okay. Oh, that's a great question. What camera body do I use is what Rauf asked me. And I use a lot of different things. When I started the museum, the whole museum was outfitted with Nikons, which I hadn't shot a Nikon since I stopped shooting film. But you roll with the punches, you learn. Still not my favorite thing to shoot on. Like if I'm going to shoot an event at the museum, I bring my own camera, but I shoot all the art on Nikons these days, and they're great. Wish I could remember them. They're really nice models. I don't remember what model it is, but it's a really good one. And I looked it up and I'm like, okay, it's good. I know it's good. I also shoot. So I shot Canon 5D Mark III for most of I shouldn't say for a very long time. For years, I shot Canon. And then my dad's been on Sony for the past few years. And so I've slowly, by osmosis, become a Sony lady. So my main camera now is a Sony A7R III.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Well, great. Do we have any other questions for Shanti? Okay, so I want to certainly say thank you for a very, very wonderful